Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our TED Talk, Bad Progress. It's time to rehumanize human behavior.
In this room a little bit. I'm going to need to feed you all coffee or something. So I am Carrie Edelstein. I'm the president and founder of Research Narrative, and I am here today to be your resident contrarian. I'm not really going to just disagree with everything, but I'm a big believer that we need to rebrand optimism, because I think optimism and innovation require a healthy dose of skepticism. We're going to talk about that today, but before we get to that, I want to take you on a little journey back to the 1990s. I know Michael kind of set that up earlier. Back to 1997 when I started my career as a wee bit researcher at a company called the Gordon S. Black Corporation. Some of you, woo! Shout out to my corporate woods pals, in Rochester, New York. Most of you may know that as Harris Interactive. They went public a couple years after I joined the company. But when I first joined, we actually had a whole floor. There was a phone center in our office space. And that was an outstanding way to learn research. You will not learn how to be a better survey researcher than by listening to an interviewer try to read your survey and stumble over it, and then listening to respondents not even understand the question. That will teach you real quick in a hurry how to be a better survey researcher. So I learned in a really great era, but the coolest part of that era was not that. It was that these bad boy Pentium PCs were starting to come out. I love that the price point hasn't changed. You just get way more power for that same price point today. And this thing called the internet had come out. And it kind of looked like bullet points on a white screen back then, very literally. This is before Google even came out. But we were really excited about the possibilities that could put in motion. Kind of think about the way things were done back then. Back in that era, in order to get in-depth interviews with a group of people, you actually had to do mall intercepts. You're interrupting people during their shopping and dining excursions to ask them about market research. Totally disruptive and a little obnoxious. Instead, we saw this possibility of instant message chats, one-on-one chats with people. And I remember doing my first one, and I was almost in tears. It was so cool to see how it worked. The same was true with focus groups. I was lucky. I had a focus group facility right down the hall from my office. Not everybody had that. But you still had to go all over the country to really do a thoughtful, and this was true really until about 5-10 years ago, to do a thoughtful qualitative study. But suddenly there was this possibility online that we could do message board forums. We could do group chats, things like that. Eventually it would become online video, although not back in the 90s. We were still in the dial-up era at home back then, if people even had internet. But most importantly, there was this option of ridding ourselves of the overhead of KD systems in huge phone centers. Not just the carrying cost of the rent, but the labor. We complain now about a $4 CPI. That was a $40 CPI back then. We'd be lucky to get a dozen or 2 dozen completes on a 20-minute survey in one night. It would take weeks to field a study that had a few hundred completes. Now we take it for granted that we can do that in an hour or two. Very different era. But the other thing this opened up was types of research that couldn't already be done. So think about something like a copy test, or a billboard test, or testing a print ad. You had to do those things in a focus group facility. You couldn't do that in a survey because people were listening. They couldn't read in a phone survey. So suddenly, there were opportunities to do at scale stuff that hadn't been done before, except through mall intercepts. Again, that very labor-intensive methodology. So we were pretty excited about this. And that went on for about another decade. I remember the first time I did an online dial test and actually mirrored it to an offline one. It was probably around 2006, and I was doing some work for Lifetime, which was a big client of mine at the time, cable network. And we had tested a 1-hour drama for them in facilities across the country. And then we took that same video, we streamed it online, and we did a dial test online, 2006. This was almost 20 years ago. And then I said a prayer, oh, please let these be similar. And I held up the dial trace from my online in one hand and the dial trace from offline in the other, and they were exactly the same. I have never taken a faster victory lap around an office than I did that day. I was so excited. We were starting to show that not only could we move this online, but we could do 4 to 5 times as many interviews overnight for the same price, and the calibrations were showing we'd get the same data. Pretty damn cool. So that was a pretty great era of market research. I was pretty excited about that. And then it kind of came to a screeching halt. And then I spill on myself. So here's the deal. We talked earlier a little bit about DIY and some of the things that happened in that era, changing sampling forums and things like that. But it wasn't that simple. What also happened in that era, I didn't pick up on this until I was at the CEO Summit. I think it was back in 2022. And someone presented this slide. This is a slide from CanBR Consulting. Credit to Simon Chadwick for this. And it's a slide about who owned research firms in 2005. For the most part, back in that era, research firms were owned, they were either public, right? Harris went public while I worked there, or they were big corporations, conglomerates that bought other businesses, or they were private businesses like the one I happen to own. We were just starting to get into private equity in that era and almost no venture capital back then. This is a slide he showed in 2022. Suddenly, we're majority owned by private equity and venture capital. We no longer own ourselves by 2022. So I started thinking, well, what effect has that had on innovation in our space? Are we innovating? Or are tech investors telling us what to innovate in? Where are those ideas coming from? And I started to reflect back, and I realized something had happened in that previous 15 years or so. And that's something I actually coined a phrase for. It's something I call tech-timidation. You've probably been in a room before, and you think that you just have some skepticism about a new idea. You don't hate the idea, but you think there's something off about this. It's not quite right. And then everybody just tells you, you don't get it. I can't tell you how many times I get, you don't get it. And my response to that is, well, exactly, I don't get it. The thing about that kind of thing, that shaming, is that I don't get it is a form of feedback. Happened again at the CEO Summit in 2024. We were in a panel about synthetic data. And in this panel about synthetic data, and I'm not a fan of the word synthetic. I think when you model humans to impute missing data about humans, that's inherently organic, not synthetic. But we were using that phrase synthetic data, which is terribly dehumanizing to the entire field of human behavior. And there was some skepticism in the room. And one of the panelists referred to a room full of research CEOs as uncurious. That's a direct quote. And I kind of laughed to myself because this is a room full of research executives. Everybody here has dedicated their careers to running businesses that ask questions for a living. Couldn't be a more curious room if you tried to find one. And yet, they were thinking about us as uncurious. Tech-timidating us, right? But skepticism is just a form of customer feedback. It's B2B customer feedback, but it's a form of customer feedback. It's literally the business we're in. Why are we not enabling skepticism and learning from it and going back and iterating to that skepticism? If you hear, I don't love this, I'm not bought in, it doesn't add value to me, that's customer feedback. We should go back to the drawing board, try to learn more. And the reality of this is the real risk of not listening can be millions of dollars or worse. So here's a true story for you. Back before I started Research Narrative, I was the head of research and analytics for an ad tech company called Juiced Media. It's a video ad tech company that was owned by a bigger parent company. And one day, my boss, the president of the company, rolls by me in the hallway and he's like, hey, Carrie, I need you to go to this meeting this afternoon. And I said, why do I need to go to this meeting? I like to have reasons before I just waste an hour. And he's like, you'll see, in his little cryptic way of being. Okay, I'll see why I'm going to be at this meeting. So I go to this meeting. And we're 5-10 minutes in, and I have literally no idea what the software engineer who's presenting is talking about. No idea what he's talking about. He could have been speaking Japanese, and I would have understood just as much. I do not speak Japanese, by the way. I understood none of it. And so I stopped the meeting because the nice part about this story is I was also the most senior person in the room. And I asked the presenter, why am I here? I don't understand a word you're saying. What am I doing in this meeting? And he said, well, I was told you had to be here. Okay, you and me both. But why do you think I was told to be here? And he didn't know. And I was like, okay, let's back up a little bit. I want you to explain what you just explained, but talk to me like I'm a drinking buddy from college. And not a dumb drinking buddy from college. Talk to me like I'm your drinking buddy that went to law school or med school, but not into ad tech. None of your engineering friends. Talk to me like I'm that friend, and explain to me what you're talking about, what we're doing here. And he explains to me that we are building a software platform to understand back-end financial analytics for our ad campaigns. Okay, that's cool. We want to understand the back-end financial performance. And I said, great. Have you spoken to the sales team about this too? Because they would like some financial analytics to drive revenue. And he was like, no, why would I do that? It's not for them. And I stopped and I was like, do you understand that we don't have back-end financial analytics unless we have front-end revenue? Because that's how a business works. And the room got dead silent. Dead silent. And I thought, I think I figured out why I was asked to be in this meeting. And so we sat there, and I realized this has been going on for 6 months. They had been presenting in acronyms and technological gibberish to the point where people in the room were afraid to ask what was happening. And here's the postscript to that. 2 weeks later, the guy presenting quit. 4 months later, they shut down our subsidiary because we were losing so much money. We had run through our venture capital runway on software we didn't need because everyone was afraid to ask questions because they were being tech-intimidated. It's really dangerous. There are real consequences to that. And I would posit, we've let the investor community in our field tech-intimidate us into some pretty bad progress. And if you don't believe me, think about what every presentation at every conference seems to be about these days. Better, faster, cheaper, fraudulent. We keep hearing about this over and over and over again. Some of these stats blow my mind. Kantar released one that said we had a 780-time increase in international hacking of surveys last year alone. That's crazy talk. We have global initiatives now to be able to attack fraud. We're spending all of our investment capital and innovation fighting a problem instead of harnessing an opportunity. How sad is that? That's not innovation. That's problem solving, but it's not innovation. So it got me thinking, do we actually need to have a solution to our fraud problem? Or do we need a solution to why we have that problem in the first place? I think it's a little more the second than the first. But the reality is, in many ways, when it comes to private equity or venture capital or going public, our interests are often not aligned. This is actually a case study we did in business school, by the way. And they're not aligned because the way that private equity companies work, the way that venture capital companies work, is short-term by definition. This is actually a definition from the American Investment Council, I think is the name of it. And they talk about the definition of private equity as being a 3 to 7 year ownership window. 3 to 7 years. I have a 13-year-old company, and I still sometimes feel like we're a startup. 3 to 7 years is nothing. It's not time to build and innovate and work your way up to longitudinal and permanent success. That is a very, very short window of growth, but not innovation. So ask yourself, can we innovate? That which we don't own. How much are we losing by accepting money to grow instead of money to innovate? Because the reality is we're perfectly capable of innovating from within. That happened for the first decade of my career. And there were some pretty great exits, right? Decipher, Hatch Tank. I was using iTracks in the 90s. We had some pretty cool innovations that came from inside our industry before private equity and venture capital got involved. So I have a theory. I believe that innovation means being human, more human. And in fact, we did a study last year, and shout out to Innovate Amar, who worked with us on this. And one of the things we looked at was the idea of good progress versus bad progress, good innovation versus bad innovation. And in that study, 82% of Americans told us that innovation should improve the human experience. Is that what we're doing here? Are we improving the human experience? Or are we trying to build more business efficiencies and make the tech industry happy? How is our innovation today improving the human experience? right? We now have to have documents with a bill of rights for our participants because we've become so obnoxious in how we deal with them. That doesn't feel like we're improving the human experience. So here's my model for that. It's a human model. H, help make lives better. How are we doing that? How are we helping? U, understand industry and consumer needs and innovate to that. You know, in 25 years of doing this, more than 25 years now, I've never had a vendor ask me, what do you need? What should we build that you can sell? I tell them the answer to that because I'm assertive, but I never get asked that question. Never does research do research on itself. That's a good note to take, perhaps. How are we understanding what the industry needs, not to problem solve, but to harness opportunities and new methodologies? M, we need to make money through long-term investments, not just short-term returns. Those two things have to run in parallel, or we're going to become obsolete over time. We're going to have this continued distrust, and that is a real problem in our industry today. A, we need to appreciate who we are and what our value is as researchers, whether it's employees or clients or customers. One of my biggest pet peeves in the world of DIY is that DIY is compared in cost to a full-service agency. But here's the reality of DIY. Somebody actually has to do it themselves. There is a person at the end client having to do that work, and they do not work for free. They have value, they have overhead, they have a cost associated with it, and we don't calculate that cost. We talk as if they have zero value. And finally, N. Let's nix the tech-intimidation jargon and speak in everyday language, right? We don't need to alienate people from the table. We need to invite them to the table, whether or not they know our jargon. So, you may or may not believe me on this, but I thought I would leave you with a little note because this room is getting a little bit tired, I can see it. So I'm gonna leave you. I'm a hip hop fan myself, I'm a hip hop dancer, so I turned to AI to help me with this, and in 30 seconds it wrote me a song. And so I'm gonna play this song for you about human innovation, just a 30-second clip because I think it's kind of a banger, and I hope you'll listen to the words. You can actually read them karaoke style.
Appreciate what humans naturally bring. Imperfectly perfect, every voice can sing. We got a magic that machines won't steal. You can't algorithm love or the things we feel. H-U-M-A-N, it's the way to make it last. No shortcuts through my future or the past. Creativity's the mantra, not some cold device. Life's a jam session, so let's roll the dice. Yeah.
So personally, I'm using my skepticism to foster optimism because I look forward to a future where we can use tools like this to be creative, but we can also build business models that value humans, because in the end, we need to pay the creators whose data I just stole to make that song. Thank you.